By accident, and isn't that how it happens very often, Martin, in many ways? I wanted to be an academic like my father, and I wanted to be a lecturer in French because that was my subject at university. But I got roped into doing stuff for the student newspaper, and I'd done stuff for my school newspaper before that, very much as a sideline. I then started doing some work for Swansea Sound, which is the local radio station in my home area. And, it grew from there, and I thought, well, actually, this isn't a bad kind of life, is it really? It's rather nice. And I got the bug, and I lost the academic bug. I was very lucky, Martin. I got a place on the BBC's famed news trainee course where they take half a dozen people on and, spend a lot of money training them. And it's a very, very lucky break for me. And from there, it's been, a pretty sort of rapid succession of years doing politics and presenting various programs, and here I am today. But that's how it started, a bit of an accident.
I just wonder how influenced you were by your predecessors, particularly when you're in your student days and so on. Were you very much aware of BBC News?
Can I let you into a secret? I was a much bigger fan of ITN.
Were you?
And yes, I was. I was very much into news and politics when I was a teenager. That's a very, very sad thing to say, isn't it? It's a bit of an anorak, really. But I was into politics. I came from quite a political home. My dad was a local politician, so I was into all of that. So I did watch the news quite a lot from the age of about probably 13 or 14 onwards. I was quite keen, but I watched ITN, and I tell you why, because it was much more accessible, although I couldn't put that into words at the time, of course. It was a much more accessible way of bringing the news to people. Language was simpler, the reports were more focused, they were shorter, and the message, it connected with viewers in a much more effective way. I'm looking back now, of course, and saying that that's my analysis today. And the BBC News tended to be a little more heavy, and, well, some people thought it was a bit pompous. I'm not going to use that word, but you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's changed now. And the reason for the relaunch, Martin, to be honest, 2 years ago was that, news audiences have been declining for 20 years. And they can't go on declining.
Across the board, though, not just on the BBC.
No, across the board. Every channel. ITN suffered. That's the reason they ditched News at 10. Let's not forget, it's come back in its glory now. But, the reason it was ditched was because, even with Sir Trevor at the helm, it had been losing audience year after year after year. So that's why it was ditched. And this was a common complaint across all the channels, and the BBC was no exception. So what we did was we talked to thousands of viewers up and down the country and asked the blunt question, why aren't you watching? And we got some very blunt answers back, and they said, we don't like the language, it's elitist, you take too much for granted, it's a little pompous, it's a little stiff, it's too cold. And they revamped it, and, we revamped the shows. It looks different, and there are new presenters, and, I was one of them. And, being on the biggest show in terms of audience, The Six, clearly I was the main focus in that way, which brings pressures of its own, as you know. Yeah. But it's been gratifying, and the audience has actually gone up over the last 2 years, which is the first time it's happened for a long time. So I'm quite pleased about that. I'm quite superstitious as a Celt, Martin, so I'm not going to say much more. But, it's been good so far, okay? Let me just leave it at that. It's been good so far.
What about the face of news head-to-head with ITN now? I mean, obviously it's very much a strong part of the BBC's charter to inform, educate and so on, and the news is a vital part of what we do across the BBC in general. Yeah. But with so many television channels on the cable and satellite services these days, people can go all day without watching a news bulletin, which is sad in a sense because they owe it perhaps to society to be informed, particularly in a year when we're going up to general elections and so on.
Well, that's true. And I think that especially in year of a general election, when I'm broadcasting to, an average of 7 million people a night, I'm acutely aware that people very often make decisions about voting based on what they watch on telly. They do not, and this is cast iron fact based on all the research, people do not depend on newspapers and rely on newspapers for their news. They rely on television news above everything else.